You have Bibles in the pew in front of you, and if you want to take one and turn to the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, we will direct our attention to a few verses there this morning. And I want to introduce you to a kind of fancy word that probably none of you care about, but someone did a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned this to a congregation member, and she got pretty excited about it. So take the chance that someone here will be excited about it too. This fancy word is exegesis. You can't answer. Neither can Gary. Neither can Charles. Neither can Caroline. Neither can Paul. Does anyone else have a working definition of the word? Yes. Neither can Jacqueline's father, Milt, the Presbyterian preacher. No, Jack, you can't do this either. Look at all the clergy people we have in this congregation. Exegesis, folks. To exegete the text is to apply layers of criticism and lenses to gather as much information as possible to figure out what might be going on through the actual words of the text, but also through knowledge of history and culture and language and literature. It's like being a detective in lots of ways and using our brains, right, to figure out stuff about God, using our rational, analytical minds. But there's another way to think of exegeting the text that one or two of you might like a little bit better, and this is the way to think of it. The word exegetes God. So that is when we consider the Bible together in worship, which is the way we're supposed to consider it, and actually it doesn't really work as well to have me standing up here talking to you, because we're supposed to be in a dialogue. It's the only way to really understand the text and exegete properly, but this is our tradition. When we consider the Bible together in worship, we're not just applying our intellect to the story. We're engaging in a process that leads God out of the Word, so that we might experience the Holy through this old, ancient book. The feeding of the 5,000 is a sweet little gospel story. Most of us know it well. It seems fairly innocuous, meaning we can tell it to the kids in Sunday school without worrying about having to explain anything too tricky or theologically complex, except that, actually there were more than 5,000 people, probably, at the feeding. Why? How do I know?
You only count the men.
You only count the men. So that's a little bit tricky, yeah? You could have a good conversation with your kids about that one. There are texts like this that seem pretty sweet and are probably most in need of our careful exegesis. Because if you think it's sweet and simple, you're probably not catching everything that's going on. This morning we're going to try and catch a bird's eye view, broadly exegeting just a few verses of this passage before we focus in on a point or two. And we've got to go quickly, so look lively. Are you with me? Do you have your Bibles open if you're interested in this? Alright, verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So we learn that Jesus is headed to the other side of the sea, and kind of the best we can do with that is to know that he was headed to the eastern side of the sea. It's a purposefully vague definition in order to conjure up images of wilderness and ambiguous spaces. Wilderness, hold that somewhere in one of your hands. Verse 2, a large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. A large crowd is following Jesus in this ambiguous location. That sounds to me sort of like another story where a large group follows a leader through the wilderness. Guesses? Moses. Yes. Hi, Moses. Verse 3. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there. Jesus goes up the mountain. Moses, too, went up to the mountaintop to encounter God. And in verse 4, now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. So we've just rooted ourselves in the Jewish calendar by learning that at the time this story takes place, we are near the time of Passover, the festival of national liberation from a foreign oppressor, the Exodus, the exact reason Moses and the people of God were wandering around in the desert. So actually a lot happens between verses 5 and 10, but we don't have time. So we're going to skip to 11. Can you find 11 with me? Jesus took the loaves. When he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Jesus takes these loaves, breaks them, distributes the food. By now, the story should be a pretty clear, although simple retelling of the manna story in the Exodus journey. The physical needs of the people of God are provided for when they're lacking sustenance. Notice something about Jesus going on here. Do these people maybe have spiritual needs to attend to? Sure, right? We all have spiritual needs to attend to, but what does Jesus focus in on? Their food, the physical need. He takes care of the ordinary, basic stuff of life first. This is always what Jesus does. Jesus is super pragmatic. I want to zone in for a second on this idea of bread. And this is not really an aside, although we won't spend much time here. Bread plays a really interesting role in the New Testament. In the Exodus story, remember manna falls from the sky, right? Well, what's manna? Yeah, we kind of don't really know what manna is. Is it bread? Well, we sort of use that, but it might be not a very good interpretation, because actually the best we can do with that word manna is interpret it as, what is it? That's what manna means. What is it? Something falling from the sky that provides sustenance. But in the Gospel of John, this isn't manna that's being multiplied, it's distinctly bread. And bread doesn't fall from the sky, does it? Not in my experience, anyway. It is a sign of the work of human hands. It's representative. It represents work and economics and politics, because the two come together. Bread is an artifact of culture and our political economy, and yet, think about this. When Jesus offers his body to us in communion as Eucharistic bread, that bread resists pragmatism and utility. So Jesus in his body takes this symbol that symbolizes work and economics, takes it into himself in the body of Christ. The bread of life does not make itself available to be bought and sold. It resists our economy. So bread functions in a variety of ways in the text. And still, if we stay in verse 11, we learn that everyone ate what? As much as they wanted. That's the miracle, right? The miracle is that everyone got as much as they wanted. Notice that the word abundance doesn't actually appear here. The text does not say anything about abundance. The idea is the same as it is in the manna story. Everyone gets enough. Everyone gets enough. What's different between the manna story and the feeding of the 5,000 plus is this thing about the fragments, what's left over, gathered up into 12 baskets. Remember what happened to the extra manna? What happens?
Spoil.
When it goes away, it rots, it perishes. Something disgusting happens to what the people try and hold on to. In this story, the fragments that are gathered, they remain. What Jesus provides remains available. So lastly, look at verse 15. Oh, I shut the Bible. John 6, verse, is anyone right there? Would like to read it? When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain. Jesus escapes the crowd because he realizes that they want to make him king, which is a path forward that fits their assumptions about who this guy is, who this prophet is, and it serves their goals. Jesus won't fit in that box, though. The divine disclosure in the story, at least one divine disclosure this story makes to us, is that God is often at work in a story bigger than this immediate chapter. We fail over and over again to see the complexity and depth of the story if we're focused only on the most immediate, comfortable answer to our needs and desires. We've really only covered 5 verses of chapter 6. The lectionary, if we were to follow it for the next 4 weeks, it goes on to lead us through the entirety of chapter 6. It rarely does that. The lectionary rarely sticks with one text for so long, but it does it because there's so much density there. There's so much in this story that could apply so directly to our lives. So it's a significant text. And as I spent time with it this week, I became especially interested in the differences between this feeding story and the Hebrew manna story, and the element that struck me as holding the most potential for me and perhaps for you as well, is this thing about having enough, and also the piece about the fragments. The feeding stories in the Bible, as we spoke a little bit about with the bread, have clear economic and political implications. Remember that we just identified this story as taking place over and against the backdrop of Passover, the remembrance of liberation from a foreign oppressor. And often, I think, for us, the symbolism of being freed from something doesn't work too effectively for people who live in relative freedom. And that's most of us. In fact, the only people who look like me who seem to get this are my friends in the recovery community. Because they live in a reality where they remember at regular intervals that they were powerless over whatever it is, fill in the blank, and that their lives had become unmanageable. The further inward I journey, which is not very far, the more I'm convinced that the recovery community, they get something that most of us are denying. They get that addiction destroys. And admitting the truth is the first step in a journey towards something better. I think most of us are addicts. Most of us are being held captive. And most of us are in deep denial. And so most of us are also desperate for freedom. Sometimes without even realizing that that's what we're looking for. It's tricky for me to put a finger on what's at the root of it. That thing that keeps us up at night and makes us exhaust ourselves during the day and gnaws away at our souls. I think, though, that maybe, for me, it's that I always need more. I mean, really, what do you say when you get up in the morning? I need more sleep. Or at the end of a not very productive workday. I should have got more done. Or what about more exercise, more money in my 401k, more influence? What about I'm never really thin enough, or smart enough, or secure enough, or extraordinary enough, or good enough? Oh, we don't live in a manna society, do we? We live in a scarcity society, and that fear that we don't have enough, and that our beings themselves aren't enough, that holds us captive and pushes us in insane ways to do and to be and to accumulate more. Maybe the clearest example of just how powerful and dangerous the theology of more is was the economic crash of 2008. The Quaker theologian Parker Palmer says it's not that we didn't have the capacity to know what was going to happen. We know, we're smart people, that in a structure where the rich get richer while the poor get poorer, where we refuse to regulate greed, in a system that encourages us to live beyond our means, we know that this is a system that will backfire. The question is not, if, the question is when. The problem is that the knowledge we need to understand what's happening, it originates underground. It comes from a place within us, a place much deeper than our intellects, from the inner teacher, or the soul, or the place where the holy is, or God, or whatever word you use for the divine. It's a place where truth has a chance to become clear. It's a place most of us, frankly, don't spend a whole lot of time cultivating because it's not work that gets accomplished sitting here on a Sunday morning. Or really just by volunteering in the soup kitchen or giving money to your nonprofit of choice. So there are all these things we know, or have the capacity to know. We know the current economic structure is still untenable for many of us. We know that climate change is threatening the continuing existence of our species. We know that racism is alive and well and killing our black and brown people. These are secrets hidden in plain sight. There are things we know, but we don't want to know. So we find these ways to evade or ignore or even deny them. Maybe we do this because if we admitted to the secrets in plain sight, those secrets would force us to change our lives. So instead we go on distracting ourselves and blocking our access to those insights that would terrify us, but could potentially also save us. We are so skilled at distracting ourselves. I distract myself primarily with couch pillows. So my sister Holly and her husband Chris, they built a house this year. And they bought a lovely lot a few blocks from my parents, and they spent almost the entire year building their dream home. These glossy concrete floors, I don't even understand it, but they're amazing. Granite countertops, this huge chef's kitchen, 5 big bedrooms. There are fancy lights. There's a loft with a playroom for the children. I could go on and on. I haven't seen it, and I think I might have been resisting seeing it. And the other night I ended up with a little bit of time on my hands. Peter and Moses were gone or sleeping or something. And I thought, something's up with this. Something is weird. That feeling like seeing her house would make me panicky. So I texted her and I said, can you give me a tour of your house on FaceTime? She said, sure. So the kids took turns holding the phone and walking me through the house. I got a pretty thorough tour. I mean, I saw the inside of toilets and everything. And through the somewhat erratic camera handling, I clearly witnessed the beauty of their hardwood floors and their stainless steel appliances, their pottery barn furniture, and I was sort of aware of this anxiety that starts in the middle of my chest and it sort of rises to the top of my head like a cloud. I was trying to really focus on the remainder of the tour, but also I was thinking about how much I hate the carpet in my living room. And how ridiculous our never remodeled 1960s themed bathroom is. How my once pristine sofa has now become a wiping mechanism for tiny hands with toast and butter. My mind was racing toward couch pillows. Because you know how some people think that if they just have whatever this thing is, everything will be okay. Their house will be okay, or their looks will be okay, or whatever. Well, I think if I have the right couch pillows, my house will suddenly transform from my shabby, not so chic decorating style into something that rivals Martha Stewart, and you will remark how cozy and inviting my house is, and I will probably grow 3 inches and lose my baby belly and fill up and have perfect cups of coffee and go on living our perfect, lovely, imperfection-free lives. And you didn't know couch pillows could do all that, did you? I'm telling you this silly story because really it's the least damaging anecdote I can think of. You're like, oh, that's really damaging anecdote. It's the least damaging anecdote I can think of as I confess my own addiction to more. The feeding of the 5,000 is my antidote. Sometimes we talk about the opposite of scarcity as abundance. But this week, the text tells the story of enough. Having it, being it, accepting it. Rather than going through the list of all the things we could go through. We're not financially stable enough, or thin enough, or fat enough, or smart enough, or talented, or successful. What if we could just practice accepting that whatever you're in the midst of, and whatever your current reality is, you have enough. You are enough. You are enough because this story tells us God is for you. God is for you. And God is with you. This story tells us that when we're hungry, God shows up. And not only will God show up, God will stick it out when things fall apart. Jesus pays attention to the fragments. The pieces of bread that fall, think about how easily bread breaks. When you crack a loaf of fresh baked bread and the crumbs start to fall, there are crumbs all over the place, right? And in this story, there are crumbs all over the grass, in between the little shafts of grass, desert grass. And Jesus says, gather them. I see them. There's a miracle left over. Maybe Jesus sees some kind of wholeness within the fragments that no one else can. Christ promises a stubborn blessing and a persistence of presence, especially at the moments when we're broken and fragmented. I have friends in my life who, over the last month, have been abruptly fragmented by partners who have walked out, the sudden death of a spouse, a life-threatening diagnosis, and financial devastation. And I think about how easily my life could become fragmented too, not necessarily in those ways, although it's possible, right? We can't ever guarantee that tragedy won't happen. But I think about how my life would become fragmented if I told the truth. If I admitted my addiction to more, and then I was actually brave enough to go on a journey to ferret out all of those places that was holding me captive, that would break me. That would break me open. The biblical text today is like a literary life raft. It's a promise that helps us see in the dark. God is for us. It's harder to remember that, though, when we haven't been nurturing our inner lives. It's like muscle memory. You know how you get on a yoga mat and you haven't been doing yoga for very long? Your body's learning, right? And things feel awkward and it's hard to do, but if you take a break from yoga for a year, 2 years, whatever, and you come back to the mat, it's weird, your body remembers. You have muscle memory. Because at one point you worked those muscles, you trained those muscles. Well, our spiritual muscle is like that too. We have to work it for it to be there. And the purpose of developing this muscle and nurturing an authentic inner life, of giving up the distractions that keep us from acknowledging those secrets in plain sight or living happily colluded lives, the purpose is not to flee from a frightening world. Nowhere in the Bible that I can remember does an escape route show up alongside the words, do not be afraid. Those words, they're simply a preface to an encounter with the Holy. In the same way, developing an inner life gives us encounter with those deeper sources of knowing that can help us find our way here. So as the text draws that out for us this morning, I wonder where you need to be liberated from more and converted to enough. I wonder whether your life is in fragments. If it is, can you rest for a moment in the promise that God is stubbornly persistent and holds those fragments with the knowledge that you might not be able to see of wholeness. If you're shifting a little bit nervously in your pew right now, thinking about what could happen if you stop chasing your distractions and set about discovering the possibilities of an authentic inner life, I can only affirm that it likely will fragment you. But learning to see more clearly what is, and practicing finding our way through, well, that's the work of being human, of living a fully human life. It's the work of being set free, of living outside of Pharaoh's grasp.